So the idea is to look at total change connecting origin with destination. But in the case of the Rhine-Scheldt delta, we actually have two chains which do exactly the same thing, but which are using different logistic pathways. They actually route the box through Rotterdam or through Antwerp to serve the same hinterland. We will now start analyzing this change by first concentrating on the maritime transportation system. The maritime shipping chains are controlled by the liners. Therefore, we will take the position of the shipping line, who is the director of the maritime chain and who needs to decide which port he will call to load and discharge his boxes. In the past, shipping lines have been generally making 2 port stops in the delta. But as container ships have been growing tremendously in size, they are inclined to reduce the number of stops. And by consolidating the volumes in bigger ships being operated in alliances, the number of liner services declines and ports engage into a new game, to be called or not to be called. So a key element that we need to investigate is how the shipping line decides on the port of call. These port of call decisions are subject to many criteria. In my research, I have compiled a list of more than 170 criteria which have been derived from various surveys with shipping lines and which are to be used to evaluate the attractiveness of a port. How do we handle such a complex decision, surrounded by so many criteria? Well, very simple. We take the decision step by step. This is also known as staging the decision process. In a first stage, we consider all the options. Subsequently, we test the options against a selective number of qualifying criteria. These criteria are the must-have factors. A port not matching all the must-haves is simply kicked out. However, in our case, where we consider Rotterdam and Antwerp, we have 2 very mature ports, and it is clear that these must-haves will not play at all. Once the options have been filtered against the must-haves, the focus will be strongly on cost. And finally, like with every important decision in life, the final selection of the prime port is not merely a programmed decision, but will be blended with human emotion. Past experiences, individual perceptions, and so on will all influence the final port selection, making it not strictly a rational decision. The price tag or cost is a very important element in the decision process. The liner industry is a sector which heavily competes on cost. The lower the cost base, the lower the tariff that can be set against the competition. Being able to offer a low price in the market is very important to differentiate, as in the eyes of the customers, all lines are basically doing the same thing. They bring their box from A to B. So liner business models are fairly straightforward. Lower the cost, which allows setting the lowest price and to kick out the competition. As cost economics of the maritime transport chain is leading, we need to explore the cost economics, and we therefore need a voyage costing model. Maritime voyage costing models exist for a long time. Gilman published already in the 70s a schedule very similar like the one you can see. In my research, I have reviewed the literature allowing building what I would call a best practice voyage costing model. In liner business, cost items are not that much a function of volume, but they run against time. Time is money really applies to the liner business. So the costing model starts with time inputs, namely the time the vessel is at sea, the time it needs to enter and depart the port, and the time it is at berth. These timings drive the computation of a significant large fixed cost base, built up by the ship's capital costs, operating costs, fuel costs, and container equipment costs. On top of that, there are the port calling costs and eventually canal charges. All these costs are incurred by the line, regardless if there are boxes on the ship or not. The only real variable cost item is the handling cost. Let's now move forward and apply this costing model. As the cost elements are quite time sensitive, it is important to have good estimates for the time variables to get the cost calculations right. I have therefore followed the ships on the radar screen entering and leaving both ports. I started measuring when the ship passed Dover-Calais up to the berth and measured again when they left the berth up to Katwijk aan Zee, where the ship is back on the main route. We will analyze the maritime transport chains for two market segments. The first one is the Far East route, which is the biggest intercontinental trade and employs the biggest container vessels coming from China, Singapore, and so on. I have used here a 12,500 TEU vessel, which is slightly above the market average. The second case covers the second biggest trade, the transatlantic, with ships coming from East Coast North America, such as New York. In this case, ship sizes are constrained by the ports on the East Coast, and we have much smaller ships of Panamax size. Let's now look at the time needed for each of these vessels to enter and depart the ports, starting with Antwerp-Deurgang dock. The time data showed great variability, and I've taken the best practice timings, meaning the best time in my sample to enter and depart the port. As you can see, the bigger ship needs a little bit more time. Let's put the Rotterdam recorded timings against those of Antwerp. As you can see, Rotterdam is faster, which is obvious as it lies in the sea. Ships calling Antwerp incur a time penalty to traverse the Scheldt. We will now convert this time penalty into a monetary value using the voyage costing model. I will present you the result for the case with the big ship only. The graph shows the cost buildup for the ship coming from Singapore and discharging its boxes in Antwerp or Rotterdam. At first sight, the overall difference looks small, but we have to be careful here as the total ship cost amounts more than 2 million euros. When we zoom in, we see that there is actually a cost difference of 22,000 euros, which is caused by the time penalty for Antwerp going in and out. With a weekly schedule, we would need to multiply this amount by 52. But we are not done yet, as we need to add one other fixed component, namely the port charges, which the ship has to pay to the port authority when calling the port. Amazing or not, the difference in fixed cost is leveled by lower port charges in Antwerp. This is an important finding. For the case of the transatlantic, which I will not cover, the difference is even less than 0.02%. Up till now, we have studied the fixed cost base, regardless if the ship is carrying any boxes. We will proceed by spreading the fixed cost base over the number of boxes on the ship. Obviously, we assume that the number of boxes is equal for both ports. As the total fixed cost is the same, the starting point is an equal cost per box. We only need to add one variable charge, the handling cost to take the box from the vessel to the shore. This is the most difficult cost estimate, as the handling rates which the line pays to the terminal operator are individually negotiated and considered as a commercial secret. I have made a reasonable guess estimate. Handling rates in Antwerp have been traditionally lower, but the gap in rates with Rotterdam has been narrowing over time. Today I estimated the difference between 15 and 20%, or let's say 13 euros per box. An important conclusion can be reached now. It is the charging policy of the terminal operator that makes the cost difference to the line. The lower charging policies of operators in Antwerp lead to a cost advantage for the upstream river port. We have been looking at cost to the line. This is not price. Sending a box from Asia to Europe, shippers are charged by the shipping line a price which is structured as a base rate plus many surcharges. It is like you book a flight for a city trip with a low-cost air carrier. The initial fare seems very low, but when adding all the extras, the number grows. Well, liners charge their customers the same base rate for Antwerp and Rotterdam. This is very much in line with our finding that the fixed cost base does not differ for both ports. And the many surcharges, such as the bunker adjustment factor or the peak season surcharge, they also do not differ, except for one particular surcharge, which is called the terminal handling charge, or THC. The lifting of the box is put as a separate line item on the bill to the customer, and lines publish their applicable THCs for each of the ports. When we compare the published THCs of the major shipping lines, we also find a difference at the advantage of Antwerp. After all the number crunching, it appears that the line passes the higher handling cost in Rotterdam to its customer. We therefore reach the conclusion that the profitability of both maritime chains is the same for the shipping line. Importantly, this conclusion assumes that the number of boxes carried by the vessel and loaded and discharged at the port is exactly the same. Various sensitivity analysis with the model also proved that the outcome is very robust, unless we differentiate the load factors and call sizes. The base assumption has been 4,000 boxes as call size and a vessel load factor of 85% of its carrying capacity. Let's now increase the call size and load factor for Rotterdam so both ports have the same cost per box. By adding 500 boxes to the call size in Rotterdam, which increases the load factor up to 88%, the cost advantage for the lower handling cost is fully diluted. Both chains operate now at precisely the same cost. Despite the complexity of liner port of call decisions, my analysis for the delta learns that it can be reduced here to a fairly simple rule of thumb. Where are the most volumes? As more volumes will reduce the fixed cost and leverage profitability. The equation between Antwerp and Rotterdam of to be called or not to be called becomes a function of market potential. We therefore need to understand which port offers most volumes. Also know that the delta is a merchant haulage market. The volume potential of the port is therefore driven by the shipper as he decides which port he will use to ship his goods. Next to logistic pathway selection, the shipper also decides on the transport modes that he will use to move the box between the port and the inland point. In the following part, we will switch our perspective, therefore, from the shipping line to the shipper. We aim to understand the shipper's decision behavior when needing to select between two intermodal chains. We do exactly the same thing, but use different logistic pathways.